talk about shock news of the day. A local New York news report ran this headline: 80% of recent New York City high school graduates cannot read. And while the headline may have been a little misleading because the story focused only on graduating students enrolling in community colleges, it still raises a much larger issue is our nation's public education system failing our kids. Joining us now is an expert, the former chancellor of the Washington, D.C. Public Schools, Michelle Rhee, author of the new book, Radical: Fighting to Put Students First. We are still with Blake Zeff, Mark Simone, and Hadley Heath. Michelle Rhee, thank you very much for coming back on. When you saw this news, your first reaction, I mean, I don't want to put down community colleges, but I think that's a lower common denominator than the liberal arts schools. If they can't read for community colleges, that sounds like a pretty awful situation to me.
Well, look, I wasn't surprised at all by this statistic. The bottom line is that in our schools today, we are not ensuring that kids have to operate on grade levels, do math, read on grade level before they're graduating from high school. In fact, when I was the chancellor in Washington, D.C., I remember a young girl who was the salutatorian of her high school, went off to college, came back at Christmas break and came into my office and said, I don't know what happened. I went to school, and I'd always done great in DCPS. I got all A's. I was always commended. I went to college, and they told me that I had to take remedial classes, that I didn't know how to write a paragraph or a paper properly. And she said, what did I do wrong? And I said, you didn't do anything wrong. It's the system that did you wrong. We don't have structures in place to ensure that when a kid gets a high school diploma from our public schools, that it actually means that they know things and are able to do certain things.
Well, we're talking about 11,000 kids. We're not talking about every kid, but 11,000 kids is a very big number. And I guess the question I want to ask you is, isn't this a walking, talking advertisement for school choice, for charter schools, maybe for homeschooling? In other words, let the parents decide where these kids should go to school because the public education is failing them.
Well, there's three things that need to happen. First, we need to make sure that every child is in the classroom of a highly effective teacher every single day, because that will make a huge difference. The second is what you referred to, which is we have to have high-quality choices available for all families, so no family ever feels like their kid is trapped in a failing school. And then the final thing is we have to make sure that we're putting our taxpayer dollars into the programs that are benefiting our kids the most. We are spending a whole lot of money in this country right now on programs and on initiatives that absolutely have no return on investment for kids and aren't helping to ensure that we have better academic outcomes.
Mark Simone, I want to ask you, I always thought, before I read this story this morning, I always thought that Michael Bloomberg, and particularly when Joel Klein was his education commissioner, were good education reformers improving the school system. This study says they're not.
Well, but you know Joel Klein, he was great at that. Dennis Wolcott does it now. You couldn't find a better person. It's just the system is broken down. I think you said it. You need school choice. There are too many people in the school system, too many layers in this Board of Education. You still hear that when you put $1 into that system, 94% doesn't get to the classroom. A lot of great teachers and a lot of smart kids come out of that school. But there's too many that fall through the cracks. It's the size of the system. It's just too big.
And I don't see, Blake, with all respect, President Obama is always talking about putting more money into education. I don't know what the federal government is doing in the education system, but more money into education is not the answer. Better education is the answer. More parenting is the answer. School choice is the answer. It's not a money problem. New York City spends a fortune. All these municipalities spend a fortune.
Well, I agree that, it comes down to methodologies a lot of the time. And one of my questions would be, if we still have Chancellor Rhee, one of the things I didn't hear her mention when she was just talking about her the three things we should focus on is, having standardized tests, and whether we should continue to make that kind of a priority when we're talking about teaching, in light of the fact that there were irregularities with a lot of these tests, with a high number of erasures and things like that. I'm wondering if that has caused her to change her mind a little bit about standardized tests.
Michelle Rhee, should we use standardized testing?
We have to. We have to have a consistent way of measuring whether kids are gaining the skills that they need or not. And so, whenever you have something like a standardized test, you need to make sure that there's high test security, that everybody is clear on the fact that if there are any compromises to that security, if people are thinking about cheating on the test, et cetera, that there are going to be specific consequences for that. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, a couple of people here and there making the wrong decisions to cheat on a test should not make us throw throw out the concept overall, because without it, there is no accountability. We, for decades in this country, have allowed schools to fail kids year in and year out. They don't have the skills and knowledge necessary to be productive members of society. And unless we have a consistent way of measuring that, we can't hold schools accountable.
But if teachers are just teaching to the test, then, you know, the students are missing out on so many other potential opportunities to learn.
Sure, and that's why we shouldn't teach to the test. In fact, the research is very clear that teachers who teach to the test, their kids don't do as well academically as teachers who are teaching a broad-based curriculum and who are teaching higher-order thinking skills.
Hadley,
so we need to inform teachers about that.
Hadley, I just come back to this. There is a free market solution to this. It is called school choice. Sometimes it's called charter schools, sometimes it's called homeschooling, sometimes it's called religious schooling, sometimes it's called private schools, but you have a choice. If these kids can't get it done, they shouldn't have to go. They should go off, but they don't let them. There's a whole administration that's opposed to school choice.
Right, and that would put parents and students in charge of choosing their own opportunities. But when I first heard this story, you mentioned parenting earlier. This to me points to a schooling crisis. It also points to an individual responsibility and parenting crisis. I mean, I'm a product of public school, and I had a great experience because my parents were always advocating for me. They were always making sure I had the best opportunities. Where are these parents if your high school senior can't read at the level they need to read? Where are you as a parent?
Well, possibly working 3 jobs. Maybe they're in poverty. Maybe they have other things they're doing. It's very, very tough. And I agree that these are complicated questions, but it's not always so easy for every parent to be there doing homework with the kids every single night.
Michelle Rhee, I want to give you the last word on the idea of school choice and charter schools. I know you've worked on that issue in Washington, D.C. Am I right? Is that the way to go? Is the performance better?
Well, look, I mean, there are some charter schools who are doing absolutely phenomenal work across the country, and there are some that are underperforming. I think we should be focused less on whether it's a charter school or a traditional public school, and more focused on if it's a high-performing school, because we need highly effective schools, regardless of whether they're private schools, public charter schools, or traditional public schools.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Michelle Rhee. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Her book, Radical, Fighting to Put Students First, it's available now. Also, many thanks to Blake Zeff, Mark Simone, and Hadley Heath. Now let's get back to your money. More big gains on the stock market, more record highs, more big cash paybacks. We are talking Wall Street when we come back. I'm Kudlow. Please stay with us.